The condition I was living in my childhood and my early adulthood was highly stressful, and the eczema itself was part of that stress. And gradually, once I myself was regulating my nervous system better through meditation, I was really sort of changing. I think of it as like the climate, and eczema had been thriving in this really stormy, lousy climate. And once the climate of my neurology started to get a little clearer and calmer and more settled, somehow the conditions that the eczema liked and in which it thrived were changing. Looking at a beautiful, clear lake with a mountain reflected, and the mountain is just vividly there, but one pebble dropped in and you realize, wow, it was only a reflection. And if you can somehow imagine that happening with your experience of this world right now, all of this suddenly will reveal to be a kind of reflection. Accept your somatic experience of having an uncomfortable emotion. The uncomfortable sensation of an uncomfortable emotion in the body, softening around it, is what allows us to let it be there. And once we let it be there, we can get more kind of tuned into what it's like to let it be there, rather than wanting it to be gone.
How does your experience go from anxiety to love in those few minutes?
Well, it happens through that series of steps I was talking about, where first,
Welcome to another episode of Success with Purpose, where we help mentor you into becoming a more successful version of yourself. We do this through giving you access to mentors you typically would never have the opportunity to connect with. We explore their journeys, their experiences, their life-changing events, their fields of expertise, and most importantly, their purpose. My name is Harry Goldberg, husband to an incredible woman, father of 2 amazing daughters, host, interviewer, and interrogator of this podcast, and director and advisor and meditation teacher of Purpose Advisory. This purpose-driven project is entirely funded by Purpose Advisory, which I am a director of. We guide clients to make great life and money decisions, and we do this through a range of different services: life vision experiences, personality, investment strategies, cash flow systems, and through teaching meditation. If you want to learn any more about any of these, link in the comments below. Now, just before we learn from yet another exceptional guest, if you find value from these conversations, please make sure to like and subscribe below, leave a review. It really does make a difference. And of course, share with someone else who's going to find value. Now, listen in, pay attention, take some notes, enjoy. Let's begin. Henry Shukman, welcome.
hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really humbled to have you here, but I'll explain to listeners why. Okay, so the brief overview of your journey from a child with depression, anxiety, chronic eczema, to a young man finding a sense of incredible joy, bliss, and perfect skin while traveling for a few months, but then with many experiences of anxiety and depression and skin which simply wouldn't stay healthy, you found yourself somehow in the role of a Zen Buddhist teacher in a city far from home, guiding individuals from all walks of life. And it's clear that your journey was filled with ups and downs, mentors, guides, challenges, and definitely unexpected gifts. Also for listeners to know, Henry here has a MA from Cambridge, an MLit from St. Andrews, written several award-winning books of poetry and fiction, taught mindfulness to some of the largest companies in the world, leading Mountain Cloud Zen Center in Santa Fe, a coordinator of Rio Grande Mindfulness Institute, and associate master in Sambo Zen lineage. So I'm really excited to have you here and share your message with the world. So firstly, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's great of you to have me. Thank you so much. I forget how you came across me, actually.
Through Rick Hansen. He suggested reach out to Henry Shukman. If he has capacity to come on the show, then get him on, share his message with the world.
Oh, that's very sweet of Rick. Wow, how he is. Yeah,
I have a lot of respect for Dr. Rick Hansen. It's amazing.
Me too. Yeah.
Okay, so for listeners, because you have a unique story of success, right? You've got the education, you got the academics, but then you've also had a huge amount of life experience, and you've gotten to this point which where your practice of success would probably be very different to the success that you strived for when you were younger. So how do you define success now?
It's really interesting when you ask me that. I realize immediately that I don't use that word very much. I'd probably, use some other word like well-being or happiness. Like, when, there's famous stories about the Dalai Lama being asked what's the meaning of life, and he just says, easy, easy question. It's happiness. How to be happy. That's what life is for. But the harder question is how to be happy. How to be happy. But if I try to think about it in terms of success, I'd have to say that, for much of my sort of earlier adult life, I think I was really kind of tormented by the word success, and it was really problematic for me because I um I had a very narrow idea of what success would mean and until certain things happened. But I thought of success as being, basically I inherited a notion of success from the cultural milieu I grew up in, which was, money was in there and sort of maybe fame or celebrity of some kind, or at least recognition in your chosen field would be there, and sort of performing very, very well at a high level in whatever your chosen field was. I basically swallowed that. And I'd say most of my, 20s and 30s, I had a certain amount of success and of that kind. I was quite lucky that when I was fairly young, I wrote my first book, and I was still fairly young when it got published, like in my mid 20s, and I got paid well enough, and not by any means particularly dramatically well, but well enough that I could live from my writing for kind of, most of my adult life, actually, until some little time back. I supported myself as a writer through books mostly, and occasionally, high-paying articles for American magazines and things like that. So that was a kind of success, quote unquote, that I wanted to prove to myself I could get, and it was very modest compared to, some friends of mine who went into other fields, who I might have been at school with or something, who, made way more money than I did. But I could kind of say to myself, well, they're not writers, they're not doing this really sort of a unusual creative thing. They're just working in a bank or something, or whatever it might be. And so I was trying, I think, to prove my worth through some kind of public, didn't have to be famous, but just, some visible form of demonstrable, culturally accepted, endorsed success. And actually, it was really a source of great unhappiness a lot of the time, because um, oddly, I found that where I started to get most sort of quote unquote success was actually as a poet, in the sense that within the field of poetry in the UK, especially, I suddenly found I was kind of becoming a, without bragging about it, somewhat sort of known poet, and I got very lucky with certain awards and fellowships and things like that, and it was kind of fun. And my first poetry book reprinted several times, and that was kind of exciting. And but oddly, actually, in that arena, in the poetry world, I never really tried very hard. I was kind of I didn't have the same drive and ambition that I'd had in other kinds of writing, where like novels and so on, where I really wanted to sort of make my mark. In poetry, I just sort of it was such a rewarding activity in itself to be. You had to live with a certain kind of engagement with the world if you're a poet, where you're open to things, and you're quite sort of resonant. You're ready to resonate with things and feel, well, whatever. What might it be that suddenly opens something up that in you that you don't have all that much control over, that really suddenly wants to speak, and it wants to speak in the form of a poem, and that somehow doing that as an activity is incredibly, it's an incredibly beautiful way of living, because, well, at least it can be, in the sense that, in the act of writing a poem or working on a poem, or in the general orientation to life that's necessary for writing poems, you've got to be kind of awake to your experience, or maybe not all the time, of course, but something. You've got to be available for something to sort of really hit you, touch you, open you, so that something unfamiliar can speak in a way you don't expect, and there's the poem. And so that was very rewarding, and I didn't really care that much, how it went, so to speak, in the world, and actually ended up having more success like that than probably in any other that I'd done to date. But I've got to say, all that was kind of that whole way of thinking about success, um, was really turned on its head, actually, through a series of kind of what I guess would have to be called sort of awakening experiences. The first one of which came out of nowhere when I was 19 years old, and so I'm going in a really roundabout, long-winded way of trying to answer the question: what does success mean to me now? So if I were to use the word success, which still somehow I'm a little bit hesitant to, but if I were to, I'd say um, it's got to be about some kind of deep fulfillment of who we are as a human being, and in a way breaking away from conditioned ideas of what success might be that have come down to us, but instead, and not only about success, but that could be one of the factors, but really finding um, a much richer experience of this very moment that is available to us, and wherein you don't need anything to be different, because it's so rich, and it's so mysterious and beautiful already, that you the add-ons that are kind of socially endorsed, or societally respected, they don't matter anymore, because we've found something so much sort of truer and fuller and richer, and that about the nature of existing at any moment. And you could say it's about the nature of consciousness or something. And to have, um, man, to be awake to that in a consistent way, in a consistent and, I want to say, sort of thorough way, I don't think there could be greater human success than that. And it's totally independent of outward markers of what we call success.
Yeah, that's a very potent point, and I love that. But that's exactly what you share in your book very vulnerably. That's exactly hearing that message is one of the main reasons why I was very excited to have you on this episode. The and what you pointed out there was it's independent of everything else. Now, a lot of people would see that and go, "But that's selfish, Henry. You can't just focus on yourself." But I agree with you. But a lot of people might be thinking, "Henry, that's really selfish." Like, no. Success, if you're just ignoring what other people are thinking and what other people are wanting from you and what other people are going to value about you being part of society, then you're just being a selfish individual kind of outlier of society, and maybe even in some way leeching from it. And I think that that's what a lot of people really struggle with, this idea of meditation or mindfulness or having a deeper experience, because it forces them to look within. And obviously they have other forms of resistance to looking within, but forces them to look within and go, what will make me happy? And then they're like, oh, but no. I've got to be able to look at what other people are going to approve of as well, because that way I know that I'm part of a community, I'm part of an environment, I'm part of some form of society, and I feel like I belong. And so, how do you balance those two? And do you even need to balance them, or does it come natural?
Yeah, no, I would look at it differently. When actually, I believe that when we're thinking what do I need to do for other people to approve of me? I don't think that's very. I regard that as more being driven by, you know, self-centeredness. And, on the other hand, the kind of thing I'm talking about, where the outward markers no longer matter, we're not looking for approval. We just don't need it. And because we're not trying to sort of in any way actually defend or fortify a self that we believe we are, actually erroneously, it turns out. I mean, that's another matter. We might get to that. Because we're not doing that. And because that's why we don't care about what people think of us and whether they approve of us or not. But that doesn't mean that we don't care about other people at all. It means, in a way, the reverse, that we're freed to really care for other people without the overlay of hoping I come across okay, hoping I don't get hurt, hoping with all that self-protectiveness and self-promotion, basically. If we're free of doing that, then we can really care much more, actually, about other people. But I say that, obviously, I've got a long way to go. But man, I've turned some corners for me, where things really changed for me in that regard, where I found, suddenly the whole project of trying to, kind of ambitiously build up this figure called Henry Shukman, just fell away. And that didn't mean I don't care about anybody. I don't care about how they're feeling or how they're doing. It didn't mean that at all. It made me much more sort of concerned, actually, and I think in a certain way sensitive to how other people are doing and wanting to help and serve more than I ever did before. So I think we're freed to be more caring by being less sort of self-serving. I mean, maybe that's a bit.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you clearly. And as you were sharing that, what came very clearly to me from all the other conversations I've held with mentors and guests on this podcast as well as elsewhere, everyone I can think of who's been a holistic version of success, by the way. So yes, they've achieved a whole lot. They've done things that others never really would have expected them to be able to do, more than what others expected, right? As opposed to more than what they expected of themselves. People always tend to underperform their own expectations. But a sense of joy and enjoyment and passion and feeling energized with the things that you're doing, and also a sense of purpose or impact, which comes along the journey. And so they've all had these same common themes. And a big part of it is that they've got to look inwards and say, what can I change about myself? How can I be more authentic within myself? How can I learn to be more vulnerable and more open to this idea of change, more open to feedback from others? How can I seek the feedback of others, even though that might mean that you're opening yourself up to other people saying that you're going to be wrong? How can I find mentoring? How can I take on more responsibility, as in more responsibility for others in a compassionate way, as
Yes.
in it with an intent to ease the suffering of those whom you're connecting with and who you're caring about. I think a very potent example of this is a guest, Vin Jiang, his amazing international speaker about communication. And one of the key things that he's said that's really stuck with me is a lot of people get nervous when they're about to talk to a crowd because they're thinking about what other people are going to think of them. And it's like, well, are you going up there for you and for your ego? Or are you going up there to serve?
Yeah.
I think that is a very worldly example of what you just shared with it. When you care less about what others think of you and you care more about the impact and the connection you can have with them, then you're able to serve more compassionately and
Yes.
more empathetically and more caringly and more lovingly with the world, which actually makes you have more of the things which you wanted to have, which are the reasons why you didn't let go of all the things which are stopping you from getting it. Is that right? Am I onto something?
Yeah. That's beautiful. You're right onto it. I agree totally. That's beautifully put. And was my point any different it was marginally different, maybe just a shade different, because I wasn't. I mean, I think because I suppose because I wasn't. I was leaving aside the whole question of like how much impact do I have. It's more like it's how much. It's more like how helpful can I be for whoever it is. It doesn't matter about numbers, you know. So in other words, because what you were saying, I mean, I totally agree with it. By the way, really, 100%. But there's also a way of sort of thinking like your that guest you mentioned, and how you were saying, but where actually the old idea of success being measured in sort of scale of reach and impact stuff, that's gone as well. That we've really reached a place where we we actually, just to be alive, just to be interacting with whoever is immediately in our life is already enough. And there's no need to be, um, dare I say, ambitious, you know, in any way. And there's a certain, I mean, you could say, well, then you're not as useful as you might be or something. But I don't know. I mean, there are these stories, you know, in every religious or spiritual tradition, there are stories of people who lived incredibly sort of modest, humble lives. But somehow the way they lived is still echoing down the centuries and providing a reminder, an example of sort of a whole other. I almost think of it as an alternate economy, a whole other economic system, except, you know, it's not like our normal economic system that actually secretly exists. And but we don't find it. And of course, I'm talking about pretty, you know, more radical forms of spirituality and growth as a human being, as I would see it, than simply, you know, turning on your mindfulness a bit more, you know, or broadening your awareness somewhat. And I'm talking about real life priorities being radically shifted and away from any model of sort of, you know, how big is my reach, you know, that's gone. And
Can I jump in there quickly? You shared in some of the earlier chapters of your book about a particular being, ultimately a man who came around when you were still a child, Gustavo, I think,
oh
if
yeah,
I remember
yeah,
the
yeah,
name.
yeah, yeah, right,
Do you
yeah.
want to share that for the listeners? Because it sounds like he's a great example of this, of someone operating in this alternate economy that you're referring to.
Yes, thanks. He definitely was. He was let me see, I'm probably not going to kind of tell it as well as I do in the book, but he was a radical, what they call like a liberation theologian. In other words, he was a young Catholic priest who'd been at this kind of Marxist seminary for Catholic priests in Belgium that existed at that time. I don't know if it still does. He was Colombian, from Colombia, and I guess he was probably in his late 20s or something, and I was a kid, maybe aged 11 or 12 or 10 or something. I don't remember exactly. And he came on his way from Belgium, on his way back to Colombia, his home country. He spent, I don't know, a week or two in my hometown, which was Oxford, and he was staying with some friends of my family. You know, the mum was Latin American, she was Colombian actually, and I think they were family friends, and she kept sort of saying, "You got to come and meet Gustavo." And so basically, a bunch of us kids would go around and hang out on her lawn. It was summer, and listen to him. And he was this amazing guy. You know, he wore jeans and had long hair and a big beard, and he was totally unlike any idea I'd ever had of a priest. And I was pretty passionately atheist actually, and sort of, you know, I had a kind of Marxist view myself of religion as this, you know, the opium of the people, and the church is sort of, you know, as a tool of colonialism and all the rest of it, you know. So I had no I actually didn't want to meet any kind of priest. I never went to church. It wasn't part of my life. But actually, I did meet this guy, and he was spellbinding. He was a really deep human being he's talking. He told us what he'd done: loads of meditation, loads of yoga. He he he'd he'd he had shaman friends back in his native Colombia. Who could talk with jaguars and and stuff like that. And it was really, especially growing up in a dry academic rationalist town like Oxford, where my parents were both professors. It was like this. It was like a window opened on an entirely different way of thinking about life. And also, I'd had this really savage eczema since I was 6 months old. It was very traumatic and very difficult, and I was very ashamed of it. And he was very compassionate. He wanted to read our palms. It was something else in his bag of tricks. But I didn't want to. I didn't like showing my hands to anybody because they were, very unsightly and covered in eczema. But he was very patient with me, and so just coaxed me, and I shared a hand with him, and just the way he touched it, and it just felt, it broke, it melted some of my defensiveness just in the way he touched my hand, in the way he looked at me, and I some of my shame somehow melted as well, and I felt a kind of warm glow from him that was really unlike. It was unlike anything I had. I'm being careful not to exaggerate. It was very unusual for me to, especially with a stranger, to feel something like that.
Have you
And
had those types of experiences with others since?
oh yeah, a lot. I mean, I've
Yes.
I've been so lucky that gradually I kind of started to find my way into healing, of one kind or another, and meditation was a big piece in the whole equation for healing for me from the age of 24. I started meditating very regularly, and because I was desperately unhappy and still covered in eczema, and and um and I don't know. I guess that world, and I've been through various worlds of meditation, different styles and different, but usually people who've done it quite a while, they're likely to have got more grounded in themselves and in their experience, and have more of a sort of working relationship with their trauma, with their foibles, with their bad habits and stuff. So generally, if you meditate a lot or somewhat for many years, you grow into. I tend to think you sort of automatically you're probably going to become a more grounded and maybe have more self knowledge as a human being. So I've been so blessed that one way or another, just yeah, I met quite a lot of.
Have you become one of those people for others now as well? Or would others say something similar about you?
I God, I would wish, but I'm afraid I don't think so. I mean, maybe, because I'm in the role of guiding others in meditation practice. I'm sure. I mean, I do hear from people that, like, hey, what you said, that thing you made us do, something was so helpful, man. Something really interesting happened. I hear that quite a lot, but that's in the nature of it. When people start meditating or they haven't meditated that much, or they're coming to a new meditation guide, things will happen. So that's in the nature of it anyway. Um, and I'm more. I know that I live more open-heartedly than ever before, but whether that makes me anything like Gustavo, I don't. I really wish, but I know that I I I I try to just keep my heart open. Because, you know, when we were talking earlier, there was a thing about sitting. You said something about sitting with oneself, and I've forgotten exactly what the context was, but it was sort of about learning to meditate and things. And I was thinking, yeah, we can get to know ourselves better, but there's always an element of reluctance, you know. There's always an element of fear. There's always an element of like, I don't want to do this. When we change, we can only change by facing what we don't want to face, you know, inwardly. Yeah. You were talking about sort of facing inwards. By the way, I agreed with everything you were saying. Just to let you know. And I think it just struck me that it's worth reminding us that to do that kind of inward growth, inward change requires facing things we don't want to face. And that's where the growth is always. And that always seems to take somehow a weird mix of courage and vulnerability.
Okay, so this is one of the questions which I'd had. One of the questions I really wanted to ask you as well. It'll be a few questions actually about release and about moving into the fear. So meditation's a big topic which I discuss with clients. I've even started teaching meditation with a friend of mine who was a monastic monk in a Hindu monastery in Hawaii for 10 years, and I see meditation as something which is life changing, and I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of questions about meditation as well. But let's just say that the person listening to this is saying, okay, Henry's had a hell of a lot of progress or has progressed through a lot of the challenges which he's faced throughout his life. And he's saying a lot of it's coming from meditation. What would be your guidance to someone who's experiencing past emotional trauma or pain coming up, i.e. fear, when they're meditating, when they decide to sit or when they decide to look inwards and they decide to do this introspection, which you're referring to? What would be your guidance to someone who's seeing this pain and this fear, and they're like, oh, no, I'll just kind of go somewhere else. This just isn't for me. This is too scary. What would be your guidance?
Well, it would depend on circumstances. In some cases, it might be, you're right, get up, don't do it. You know, go for a walk instead. Go to the gym regularly instead, or something. There's a lot of other good things we can do for ourselves. If someone's got support and guidance, it's a different picture, you know, because meditation, yeah, you know, it's not just, it can be so many different things, but
Okay, well, why don't we take a step back and we say, and I'll ask you a simpler question. What is meditation? What is mindfulness? What's the difference? And you shared that you've explored a whole lot of different meditation practices and spiritual practices. How does the meditation practice which you teach and guide people through now and practice for yourself differ to a lot of the other ones which you've explored? And why is that the one which you've landed on and connected with? Let's go to that first, and then we can explore where someone might apply meditation in their life.
Okay, so just a little bit of sort of a vocabulary, really. Meditation is a thing that we do, you know, and it's usually about sitting down, although you can also do walking meditation, and paying attention in particular ways. And most of them are designed to develop mindfulness. So, because the word mindfulness often gets used kind of interchangeably with meditation these days.
Yes.
It's not. I don't think it's strictly sort of right, really. Mindfulness is what we're going for. We're trying to develop a kind of awareness that is broader than our sort of object focused attention that we're normally in. You know, normally whether it's a task or a person or a thought or a project or something, we normally sort of we guide our attention in a narrow beam usually, right? So it can be much wider. We're equipped with, in fact, a much wider lens all the time that's available. And we can, to get more flexibility, sort of zooming in when needed, being wider when needed. It's really nice because when we're in the broader awareness, there's an ease that always comes with it. Suddenly it's easier to recognize that we're alive, that we're experiencing this moment, that there's a lot of richness in this moment. You know, it's and that's really what Well, that's a real sort of loose way of defining mindfulness, but it's having that broader awareness, that recognition. Oh, yes, I'm having experience right now. I'm conscious right now. Experience is going on right now. Rather than just being kind of caught in just a chain of narrow objects that we just follow through the day. And we never get that moment to recognize, I'm alive. So I would, that's a very, one real sort of broad brushstroke way of saying that's what mindfulness is developing that capacity to be more broadly aware. Okay, so
It might be, and so before we go to your next point, which I'm on edge to hear, it might be worthwhile for the listeners to then clarify as well what's object focus, because most people aren't necessarily thinking about things in their physical world, but they might certainly be thinking of thoughts. I think it was Josh Corder shared that you have 4,000 thoughts per minute on average. And obviously, you're not aware of most of them, but when you're lost focusing on the thoughts, is that also what you mean by object focus?
yes, it is. Yeah, I don't mean just physical objects. Thank you for bringing that up. In the meditation world, objects can mean thoughts, even feelings as well, as much as they can mean physical objects. So dead right, exactly. And sensations, of course, as well in the body would also be objects. Um, of course, it goes without saying. But so yes, and a lot of us have a kind of back and forth between tasks that we're engaged in, and then when we're not engaged in them, internal storytelling, narrative. Literally having voices speak in our mind that are sort of, that's the internal monologue, the internal, sometimes it's dialogue, just a running commentary on life. That if we're not used to noticing it, we might say, no, I don't. But actually, most of us do. But usually less so when we're engaged in a task. And so, that's one reason that we can actually enjoy work, is that and of course we can enjoy it quite a lot, and sometimes we don't. But one aspect of it is that it tends to switch off that internal self-monitoring and internal commentary, which really comes between us and our experience of life. And so to have a practice, and this is one thing meditation can do, is a practice that dials down the inner voice, the inner dialogue, the inner monologue. So it gives us relief from it, at times at least. And having those moments when it goes quiet can be just remarkably lovely, and allows us again to be more alive and awake to the moment at hand. you know
Now, there's a lot to share there. Like there's so much to dive into. With everything you share, I feel like we can go down another million rabbit holes, and I want to make sure that this continues to remain really relevant to our listeners, the majority of whom are probably in their mid 30s to early 40s. They've had some success in their career. They've done well for themselves overall, but they're starting to recognize that can't, like, just having a status at work or having a higher income or having a nicer house or a nicer car can't be everything in life. There's got to be more to it than just that.
Yes.
And they might be hearing this and thinking, oh, meditation. Okay, sure. I can be open enough to it. I can practice this period of doing nothing per se, or at least intentionally doing less. But how's that going to achieve anything more? Like, I want more in my life as opposed to I want less. So what would you share with them when they're starting to say, really, really, Henry, like sitting down and doing nothing, or sitting down and doing a practice of something which I do, which is going to take me away from everything else, is supposed to improve how I interact with everything else? How does that work?
Yeah. Nice point. Well, very, very. It actually interacts really well because what we're doing is two. There's basically two projects that meditation is about. The first is about calming down and opening up to be present. So reducing our reactivity and our stress that we live with, usually unconsciously, by the way. But we reducing that so that we become more open and able to taste the moment, and then that changes how we interact with people. And after we're not doing it for a lot of time each day. Most of us won't do more than 30 minutes a day, perhaps. You can do more if you want, but that can be a regular dose for many people. So it's not a huge chunk of the day, and it doesn't mean that you stop doing all the other things, but it can, just that alone, project one of kind of just a little bit of calming down, allows us to open up a little bit more, allows us to interact more thoughtfully and sort of cognizant of what we're doing with others. And that's kind of beautiful. It gives us more life. It actually allows us to show up for life and be present more. So rather than more life measured in terms of years, more life measured in terms of depth and engagement and aliveness to the experience of now. So that's the first thing. But the second thing it does, or can be, which is in the kind of, I guess, the sort of trajectory that I've been on, and I think more and more people are coming to this, is something much more radical and important, really, which is discovering more and more that there is to discover about who we really are and who we aren't as well. And it is probably the preeminent sort of arena for making very significant discoveries about the nature of self, and that can have a massive impact on our lives in a really positive way. I mean, this is the big, real sort of game of meditation. Actually, it's got those, you could almost call them therapeutic benefits and sort of life enhancing benefits. That's great. But there's a much bigger side to it, which is actually making, not theoretical, but personally experienced radical discoveries about who and what we are, what our relationship to this world is, in a sense, what life is. Or, maybe we don't get a full answer to that, but we certainly can open up to the mystery of what life is in a way that we couldn't before. And meditation is a context for doing that kind of thing. And that's granted that we're alive for however long we are alive, and presumably we're going to die. Certainly we're going to not be living in the way we are right now. Granted that's going to happen, isn't it kind of couldn't one of the projects that we could now engage in be investigating what is it to be alive? Who really am I? I have a set of ideas of who I am, and sort of memories and plans, and but really, who is it in the middle who's having this life? We can actually investigate that, and we can find sort of mind-blowing realities about that. And I hesitate to say find out exactly who we are. I'm not sure I'd exactly say that, but we can make mind-blowing discoveries about the nature of human consciousness, human experience, human awareness.
I'd love to hear what some of those insights have been for you, because my personal experience and journey with meditation, or at least not so much the journey, I'll keep that to the side, but my personal experience has been every time I have one of those aha moments in meditation, I realize more of what I'm not than realizing what I am. So I realize that it's actually, wait, I'm not the one who's seeing what I think I'm seeing. I'm not the one that's thinking those crazy thoughts. I'm not actually the one that's having these crazy emotions which are coming up, which I find very impactful in day to day, right? So if you get triggered by someone, your spouse, your child, your colleague, or your client, or whoever it is, and or your father, you get triggered by them, and then you go, wait, I'm actually not the one who's having those experiences, because you can start to get that sense of it. But that doesn't actually give you any more clarity to who you are. And every time that I get closer to this idea or this sensation of who I am, it's it's more of a sensation than it is something that I could possibly ever put into words, which I think is why so many teachers have gone in roundabout ways to try and explain what it is, because I don't know if it can be put into words. So I'm curious from your perspective, how's meditation, or how does this practice of meditation to cultivate mindfulness and this awareness teach you more about who you are, as opposed to what my experience has been is just teaching me more of what I'm not?
Well, teaching us about who we're not is precisely the path to finding out more who we really are, if you see what I mean. It's by disillusioning ourselves of assumptions we'd made, by releasing assumptions we made, that we're getting closer to the reality of it. Now, there are different levels of this. One would be one of your guests I listened to, who is very cool. It might be the guy you mentioned, because I think it was part of his story that he went to a monastery in Hawaii. But he was driving along, right? And his business was collapsing. He was a young guy, and his life was collapsing. And all of a sudden burst out laughing, right? And didn't care. Found he just was free of caring about that stuff. You remember?
Yeah, that's Jaikith, episode
Yeah, okay.
3. He's a close friend of mine who I run those meditation masterminds with. Exactly.
I'm so glad to hear it, because that story really resonated with me. Because when I was 19, I was just looking at the water, one sunset, the sea, and this was during the period when I was away from home, and I was working on my gap year I had before college, and actually while I was away, this eczema I'd had from infancy was suddenly much better, and I was much happier, and I was staring at the sun setting over an ocean, and all of a sudden my experience of the world just sort of flipped completely, and I was absolutely inseparable from everything that was going on. There was no separate me viewing something. What I was seeing and what I felt I was were one thing, and that one thing had no real sort of substance. So I couldn't say what it really was, but it was not at all what I thought I was, and it felt like the whole universe was present, and it was an incredibly beautiful, dramatic for me. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before, and I was just deliriously happy for 6 weeks. I was walking about in a kind of daze of wonder and awe, and much more open also actually to sort of suffering in the world where I saw it, and completely different orientation in life, and it was incredible, and I would regard that. I mean, I think, finally years later I realized, well, I'd had something they call an awakening experience, where you wake up out of a certain sense of self. But that doesn't really mean that you kind of then know exactly what you are. I just could say that I knew I was what I more really was part of something that somehow included everything. That's what it felt like, that I was inseparably part of a great whole that included basically everything. And I mean, it was very humbling. It wasn't like, oh, I'm everything. It wasn't really. It wasn't sort of. It wasn't like that. It was more like, oh, I'm just not separate from anything. It was an incredible experience, and I would regard that to this day. I still do actually, and I've never had various other kind of breakthroughs like that over the years in various forms of training I've done, that are showing me a more accurate picture, or a less kind of constricted picture of
Right.
who and what I am.
It looks less distorted, looks less cloudy. I think as Dr. Hansen shares, it's looking through the glass as opposed to looking at all the things which are on the glass. So you look through the window to be able to see out into the truth of what's there, as opposed to continuing to be distracted by just what's
Yes.
really close and really narrowly in front of you.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a little bit analogous to, say, looking at a beautiful, clear lake with a mountain reflected in it. And the mountain is just, with covered in trees, let's say, and it's just vividly there. But one pebble dropped in, and you realize, wow, it was only a reflection. And if you can somehow imagine that happening with your experience of this world right now, of this moment, we're sitting here at our computers, our desks, I've got the room in front of me, there's a camera, there's the wall, there's actually some boxes, and it's a bit of a messy room, and there's some lights and curtains, and evening outside just starting here in Santa Fe. All of this, imagine if all of this suddenly were revealed to be a kind of reflection on water, and that there's another level of reality in which it's not, this is all appearing exactly as it is, and we're having this conversation, you and I, Harry, it's all like it seems. It's just that it's actually an appearance, and there is a kind of level of reality, or perhaps we better say level of consciousness or awareness or something, in which it's all arising, and you can find that. And when you do, it gives you this much different and sort of broader perspective on your life, meaning on your experience, meaning on this very moment. And it's something that, if it comes sort of clearly enough and in a way sort of thoroughly enough, you can keep tapping into it. And it's such a big perspective shift. And weirdly, it doesn't mean you can't function. You totally can. I feel in the process of my journey, and which has been mostly through meditation, having sort of, maybe I'd say, more familiarity with this sort of weird, wider reality, if I dare call it that, it seems to make us function more effectively, not less, actually, because somehow we're a bit freer and looser and more responsive, and more energy is freed up, and we can work more sort of strategically and more powerfully, and it's all good, and at the same time we're less prone, I mean, in my case definitely not completely free of, but less prone to getting so caught up in things and really disturbed by things that actually our disturbance doesn't help us deal with.
Mm. I love the term that you just used, functioning, because when I started meditation 6 years ago, right, and I'm obviously on my baby steps, especially compared with someone like yourself, although that's probably a mistake to compare either way. But all of that aside, I started on the journey, and I started realizing that I'm an addict to my thoughts. I'm a functioning addict. I'm a functioning alcoholic, but it's not alcohol, it's my thoughts. And it's as though the more that I've been able to release that, the clearer I've been able to function. I don't need the addiction to, or I don't need the thoughts which I'm addicted to in order to be able to function. I can actually, believe it or not, function better without it.
There you go. That's
okay?
exactly right. That's exactly right. Now imagine so that's about disengaging, we might say detaching from the inner monologue. So, and of course it's not only talk, I know we get images as well, but from the thought stream, being able to sort of have it be there without being totally snarled up in it, right? And then the less involved we are with it, the more periods come when it isn't even active. It just goes quiet, and we're just here without anything that might pull us away from being here. So that's terrific. I'm great to hear you're tasting that. That's golden, and then this isn't for everybody, okay, but it can be for some. They're really interested in what is my sense of self. They're really interested in is what is my real place in the world. What is it to be alive, for these given years, and then dead, and what the hell is it all about, kind of thing. And who am I having this experience? If people get curious about that, those bigger questions, I guess you could say, if they want, there are paths of practice, or kinds of meditation that can lead to, that are designed to lead to radical reappraisal of who we are, who we've taken ourselves to be, and what our place in the world is. So, in other words, I guess I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, like, I've got millions of questions stored up, and I'm consciously attempting to let them go as I'm listening to you. And then I have a question. I don't want to jump in because I don't want to interrupt anything what you're saying. But I and as part of all of this, I want to make sure that continues to remain relevant to anyone who's listening, someone who is on a meditation practice or someone who hasn't yet started meditation, and they're hearing this, and maybe they're going to be inspired by someone like yourself to be able to start exploring it. And so maybe this question brings it back on track for them. How does one actually release, in your experience? Like, it seems paradoxical, right? If letting go is about stopping the effort, how do you put in the effort to stop the effort?
Okay, you said the word release, right?
Yes.
How does one release? I mean, because there's different things we can release, and you described, I think, really nicely, the releasing kind of attachment, engagement with the thought stream. Finding that we don't have to be caught in it. It's like there's a raging river, and we're used to being in it, and then all of a sudden we find we actually can kind of crawl out on the bank and just let that river roll by, and we don't have to be in it and turned around by the turbulence. We can be out of it. So same thing with thoughts. We can release our involvement with them. And how do we do that? Um, well, what I teach these days, to be honest, is a very, very easy, relaxed kind of meditation. I've been teaching Zen for the last 12 years, but in the last, also some mindfulness as well. You mentioned actually in that bio you gave at the start. But I got this program, I called it Original Love, because I think love, finding a sense of love, is really what meditation is all about. It's the love, or a sense of self-love, self-compassion, and a sense of belovedness, a sense of kindness that can well up in us, is the kind of is the lubrication that makes meditation really work
Are
well.
you looking for this love, or are you receiving it through the practice of meditation?
Well, I'll tell you what I do. I'm trying to get these days. I'm trying to get people to be still and comfortable and relaxed, and usually upright. I think it's kind of good. It's easier to meditate upright, and then to see, usually pretty quickly somebody might get some little feeling of anxiety or stress, or people get performance anxiety around meditation. It's very common. Am I doing it right? Am I going to do it well enough? And so the moment there's some stirring of some kind of difficult feeling, we then move to, just feeling the body and letting the body be soft, and letting it be warm and relaxed, and gradually finding that there's a way to be kind of at home in our very bodies, at peace in our very bodies. And we can have a little nub, a little knot, as something uncomfortable emotionally, and let it just be there. And so we learn to allow a difficult emotion to be present without freaking out about it, without trying to push it away, by resting in a kind of soft body. And this can be taught. It's not a big reach, this, and beginning meditators get this, and they learn to be softer, literally feel physically soft, and it makes it all easier. And then what comes out of that softness is a quality of allowing, of just letting things be the way they are, including if there's a difficult feeling. And that allowing opens up a kind of tenderness and the tenderness becomes a little bit like love. And so we can go from anxiety to self-love, which is really, I think, quite beautiful in a series
It
of
is.
easily taught steps. So we start with a common little bit of stress that, yeah, probably, I mean, 99% of us must know this, be quite familiar with being antsy or stressed or, anxious somewhat. And then, wow, if meditation can help me in 5 minutes or 3 minutes go from just like not wanting this and being really uncomfortable with it to actually a feeling of self-love. I can love myself. And there's a tenderness that can open in me and this softness that can open in me. And I mean, that's kind of beautiful. And then we start to get an association of that with meditation, with being still, with being with ourselves in a kind way. And it's, yeah, that's, you were saying, how do you get to love? That's kind of how I like to teach it these days.
So what you shared there is that there's kind of this journey. You're sitting there, you're observing. You might not be sitting, you might be walking, or you might be lying down. That's fine. But you're observing, or you're just being patient with and open to anything that's coming up ultimately, and you're resting in a soft body as you described it.
Yeah.
And at some stage, the anxiety is either replaced by or turns into a sense of love and peace. This is going to be a hard question, but how does it transition or be replaced by, or is there something else going on? Like how does it go from anxiety? Like how does your experience go from anxiety to love in those few minutes?
Yeah. Well, it happens through that series of steps I was talking about, where first we find, oh yeah, my heart area, my chest area is a little uneasy. It's just not feeling very good. And then we deliberately sort of introduce a sense of softness in the shoulders, in the arms, in the hands, in the belly, in the hips, the legs. We actually feeling a certain kind of softness and warmth in the body. And I systematically, sort of rather carefully, guide this so people tune into it. They go, oh yeah, that's lovely, a nice soft feeling, warm and soft. And then that softness can become a little bit tender. Okay, are you following this, Harry?
Yeah,
And then,
definitely. Like a
and
very
then,
somatic kind of experience you're referring to, right?
yes, that's right. And then the tenderness, we can then kind of just gently see whether we're ready to be tender around the chest area, and then let that little sore place be present and be surrounded by a softness and a tenderness. That's the switching point. Because once we can have a softness and a tenderness physically, somatically, as you put it rightly, around the sore place where the feeling is, then that tenderness, it morphs quite easily into a vulnerability. And then that can go to self-care and self-love.
Okay. And so you referenced feeling multiple times, and that's distinctly different from what we were referring to earlier as thoughts. Like you did refer to objects as thoughts and feelings and physical things around you, or at least those which you perceive. Is it so you have these thoughts come up? It's usually we usually first notice the thought of anxiety, and then we recognize that there's the feeling of it that's attached to it. But
Right.
But are we
Correct. Totally agree with that, by the way. Yeah.
okay? Perfect. Thank you. And so what we have the thought which comes up. We recognize that it's there. We recognize there's emotion within it or a particular feeling that's connected to it. And then we allow that feeling to soften. So it doesn't even matter so much what the thought is that caused it, right? Like it doesn't even matter so much that it was your spouse or your colleague, or it was, I don't know, something that reminds you from something that happened in childhood. It doesn't even matter what that is. You just notice that there's It doesn't even matter so much what the emotion is. You just notice that there's a sensation, or what you're referring to as a tightness or a restriction or a constriction.
Yeah.
And then that's what you focus on to let
Yes,
go? Or...
that's right. That's right. Yeah. Hey, Harry, just so I got to ask you something.
Hmm.
I don't know whether I'm using this mic. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. That's perfect.
Okay. But you don't think we need to restart the whole thing?
Oh yeah, let's just start from the beginning. So, welcome, Henry. No, I'm kidding.
Keep that in, won't you?
What I was no, sorry. This might be an aside. Maybe I'll include this in the recording. I don't know. But just like what I share with my daughter in an attempt to teach her mindfulness, just 3 years old, is to help her be grateful for the experience of having had, I don't know, bubbles that she can play with, or having had her bike that she was able to ride, rather than just be focused on the lack of being able to ride it right now. So similarly, I'm grateful that we have found your better mic more than halfway through this conversation, or maybe just halfway through, rather than the fact that it wasn't there for the first hour. Damn it! This really is all nice. Terrible. I hate it.
That's really nice. Well done. Good. Yeah, lucky daughter being taught so well by you. Ding, ding, ding. What were we on? It was about thoughts, feelings.
We were talking about the feelings, being able to recognize it from the thoughts. You end up recognizing that there's an emotion. You recognize that that's actually a sensation in the body, or maybe you skip all of that and just go to the sensation. And then off the back of that sensation, you soften that and you somehow let it go, or it somehow goes away.
No, it's not about making it go away. That's the whole thing. Exactly. You soften around it. You get tender around it. You get vulnerable around it. You hold it tenderly. You don't try to get rid of it. That's not the way. It's what's so beautiful is that you don't have to change anything, except really your somatic experience of having an uncomfortable emotion. The uncomfortable sensation of an uncomfortable emotion in the body, softening around it, is what allows us to let it be there. And once we let it be there, we can get more kind of tuned into what it's like to let it be there, rather than wanting it to be gone. We get more interested in the condition of allowing it to be there. This is the secret, actually. It's to not want it to to I think that's where the self-love.
This is where it's exciting. This is where it dives into some of the real key questions to ask. That, like, the first one being, people might listen to this. Well, I know I'm going to share it with everyone I know who's experienced eczema, for example. There are going to be people who are going to listen to this going, I've tried everything. If you read Henry's book, you probably haven't tried as much as Henry has, but sure, you've tried a lot. And is this the same thing which allowed your eczema to pass? Because it doesn't look like you have it right now. Is it?
No, I haven't had it, in touch wood, in 30 years.
Wow.
I mean, I can tell you that my path with eczema, I think it's a mixture of things, but including luck. But the improvements, which took about 10 years, really, started with meditating. It was when I started to meditate, I could see that I began to be on a path of healing my skin. And it wasn't at all straightforward. And I don't think, because eczema is really weird, and they say, the doctors, the medical researchers, they kind of say they don't fully understand it. They know that it travels, quote unquote, genetically with hay fever and asthma, but this particular kind of eczema, they call it atopic eczema, which is I think the most common kind. It's kind of weird. It's not exactly allergic, but it travels with allergies. Genetically, it travels with them. But it's not actually allergic. You don't need to have an allergen present in order to have it. It can be exacerbated by stress. That's clear, but it isn't necessarily. So the factors are not clear, but it also, the way I see it now is like the kind of the condition I was living in, in my childhood and my early adulthood, was highly stressful, and and uh, and the eczema itself was part of that stress, but it wasn't the only thing. And and gradually, once I myself was regulating my nervous system better, which through meditation, daily, religiously, every day, twice a day, I sat, did my meditation. And once I was doing that, I was really sort of changing. I think of it as like the climate, and eczema had been thriving in this really stormy, lousy climate. And once the climate of my neurology started to get a little clearer and calmer and more settled, somehow the conditions that the eczema liked and in which it thrived were changing. And it certainly, it wasn't a clear straight line improvement by any means, but overall, over about a 10-year period from roughly my early 20s to my early 30s, it did get better and finally mostly left.
So this might be a critical part. Just picking up on what you shared, you mentioned that time that you had. I mean, you were in literally rainy, stormy UK, right? Cloudy,
Yes, literally.
and that was
Yeah.
describing your inner climate as well. Which ironically is when it came back, right? When you went back to UK after being in South America. But you mentioned, I'm trying to get the words right. You mentioned that you were in a stressful environment. Is it fair to say that you were in a stressful environment, or were you in an environment that was making you stressed?
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good point. I was so unhappy that um, I really kind of only knew how to find the environment I was in stressful, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I could have been in exactly the same environment and loved it and found it invigorating and enjoyable. And it was my own neurology and my own cognitive behavior. I mean, my cognitive habits
Mm.
that were so ingrained, I think, that were making, I think, would have made almost any environment stressful to me.
Mm.
Thank you for pointing that out. Actually, that's I think I've got that in my book and forgot, because I wrote that
Right.
book like
I
some
haven't
5 years
read
ago.
that in your book yet. As we mentioned, I've been struggling to speed read through it because every page has so much wisdom, and so I've only gotten a third of the way through.
That's
But
very
this,
kind of you to say, but whatever. Yeah.
I think this is a very pertinent point for anyone who's listening now who finds themselves in stressful circumstances. And obviously, I've had a guest on here who speaks a lot about trauma. She's gone through a lot of trauma from when she was young, and she went from homeless to CEO and across different countries, and she has daughters, and she's had an amazing journey. Her name's Yemi Pen, and a core part of her message is that the body keeps the score. Right?
Yeah.
What's showing up in your body? Well, that's showing you that there's something to pay attention to. And
Right.
and I suspect what I've seen with my work with clients, but also with my work with myself, and then with friends and family, is that there can be a lot of reactions that people have to stress. Clearly, for you and for many, it was eczema.
Mhm.
I know for others where it's they get sick anytime that they're stressed, and they end up being like sick or fluey or cold for the majority of the year. There are others who, for myself personally, the first sign of stress is when I have to start massaging my right shoulder. That's my first sign. I suspect that everyone has something. I think there are people who have bowel issues as a result of stress. People who have literally clumps show up in their neck,
Yeah.
and people who are losing their hair, and people who are doing all sorts of things happen to their body as a result of the stress that they're having. So I think this is really relevant to anyone who feels like they're having stress. And I really want to dig into this idea of the inner climate and the difference of inner climate versus the world around you and those outside of you and your other environment. Do you want to talk a little bit to that, especially from the experience that you've had personally, but also from the experience that you've had with guiding and teaching people?
Well, if we used another term for that inner climate, which sort of talked about the nervous system,
Hmm.
then I feel that one of the primary projects of meditation, and this is another way of putting it. I said earlier there were two. This is the first one again. It's tending the nervous system.
Hmm.
It's toning the nervous system. It's giving our nervous systems a chance to reset. Because for many of us are living with kind of chronically overactivated nervous systems. It could be the ventral vagal, where we're interacting with others and we're
Hmm.
sort of that's fired up, and we're repeatedly and for long periods of time it's carrying stress. And um, could be the dorsal vagal, where we're in a freeze response. We're sort of shut down in some way as a result of trauma, whatever. But to be when we come to be still and quiet for a period of time every day, and I think it is important actually that it's daily. That sets up. That's another kind of climate change. That
Hmm.
the body, the neurology, the unconscious, if it's happening for a bit of time every day, they start to sort of trust that something new is going on. This stillness thing daily, and it's a time to it gives us an opportunity, a space and a time in which we can actually address how we're doing. We may well never really get that in our life if we're very busy, and when we're not busy we're immediately diving into Netflix, and then we conk out and go to sleep. It's very easy to have a life actually where there simply isn't 10 minutes of the day when we're just checking in, seeing how we're doing. And if we're not in the habit of that, it may not be easy to do. And when we do it, we may not like what we find. But
Hmm.
having gradually developing the capacity to do that is what allows us to start tending to our nervous systems, letting them re-establish equilibrium. And that's a big deal because, really our nervous system is kind of how we, hey, just a moment. Hey, Saul, just a moment. I'm recording something, love. Did you hear that, by the way?
Yeah, I heard the song go, Dad. I didn't know you had kids.
Yeah,
Um,
two lads. Yeah.
yeah, wonderful.
Um, so wait, where did I get to? Like, yeah. So giving ourselves this chance to come back to tend to our nervous systems, and our nervous systems are where we live. They are the carrier, the software, the hardware and software that actually process the way we feel being alive. It's really all about the nervous system. And so to start giving that some attention and some caring, and of course we probably do in some ways as well. Exercise is good for it, and so on. Loving interactions are good for it, of course. And um, but actually, just this simplest of all, being still and quiet, alone, or maybe in a group but not interacting, a little bit every day. It 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 is that opportunity to uh, regulate, fortify, tone, develop, build, strengthen, rejuvenate our nervous system.
Okay, so this and this comes at perfect timing because um, I got to ask at least these questions.
Okay.
Who, um, you're married and you have two boys, and so you're a father, and of course you had a lot of challenges with your own father when you were growing up, and you've been on this journey of meditation and mindfulness and practice and rewiring your own urology, changing your inner climate. How has this transformed your ability to be a great partner and a great father, or a better
Well,
partner,
yeah,
better father?
yeah. Maybe we have to say better. Yeah, I think. I mean, honestly, I think hugely because I having this practice and because I've done a lot of therapy as well. I mean, basically, I've been on a path of healing and awakening. I'd say those two. And by awakening, I mean that the sort of deeper explorations of our cosmic and
Hmm.
existential situation. Which I think is available to us and is the coolest thing we can do, really. In some ways. But doing all that has meant that I'm definitely. God, you ought to talk. Really ought to talk to my wife about it before. Take all this with a pinch of salt. But on the whole, I'm less reactive. Better at being more responsive and less reactive. In a nutshell. In other words, just much more able to have a measured response than I would be otherwise. Let's say.
Okay, can we dive into a little bit more? What would it look like if it wasn't a measured response? And what does it look like now that it is a measured response?
Well, as somebody who grew up traumatized, um, I've had a lot of uh, fear and doubt and defensiveness about relationships, about relating to others. I grew up very distrustful of others and just really and cautious and anxious and scared of other people a lot of the time. I mean, um, and that really has changed, and it's changed gradually and in a series of kind of breakthrough moments as well, where suddenly some piece of my own programming was just clear to see, and I was able to release it, and a flood of warmth and love comes in that is then easier to express and share. That's I've been, I actually I don't say that's only about meditation. That's a ton of therapy of different kinds have really helped me over the years.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's I hope that's an
Because
answer to that.
well, it's part of it, right? Because like I mean, I so obviously this will be cut out from what people hear, but there was a moment there where you were interrupted by one of your kids shouting "Dad," and I could see visibly in your facial response there wasn't anger or frustration or annoyance or whatever it was, like, which most people would experience, like, oh, these people should know, these people know that they shouldn't just shout, they should check if I'm busy, whatever, right? Like I could visibly see that didn't show up on your face like it would for most people, and as a result it was pretty clear that you responded in a very loving and caring way and just explaining the situation, as opposed to being triggered back to whatever happened in childhood anytime that you were interrupted, or if someone interrupted, if you were the one interrupting your dad or whatever it was.
Right.
And so that was very clear to me. Can you think of other examples where that's showing up?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think. Well, it's nice for you to point that out. I mean, actually, why not leave that in? That might be quite.
Hmm.
Well, I
Yeah,
suppose
yeah.
if you won't if you cut out the call, but that yes, I mean that totally for me is very. That seems very. I mean, in a nutshell. I mean, maybe this sounds a bit crass, but damn, I mean, this kind of work that I've been talking about on ourselves. I mean, it allows us to love more.
Mm,
In a nutshell, it makes it easier to love, to literally feel love. I love him. It's easy.
mm.
And there's no. That's the first thing that comes up, really.
Yeah. You
You
can
know,
love
and
him. You can love the people that will eventually listen to this. You can love this conversation which we're having, and you can love all of them at the same time. Is that what you're saying?
yes, I mean, I think yeah, maybe it's not. Maybe yeah, I guess there's different kinds of love. There's different circles of love, but
Mm,
feeling this kind of I don't know, benevolent attitude towards life generally
mhm.
comes more naturally
Yeah.
um, through these kinds of practices. That's one of their fruits, and I think that's kind of nice, right?
Mm,
And I'd call that a kind of success, actually.
yes. Success with parenting, success with loving others, success
Yes,
with being connected to others, or pursuing connection rather than
yeah,
disconnection.
that's
If
right,
we
that's right.
if we assume
And in
it's always one
some
or the
ways,
other, right?
yes, yes, and in some ways, there's something like, loving this moment,
Mm.
loving the moment. I mean, I know there was some point in my Zen practice where there was just this sort of real decisive shift, and thereafter, I could always feel that somehow every moment, the heart of it was love
Mm.
in any moment, and that included some really difficult moments.
Mm.
But
Yeah, so
maybe
that
this is off track. Is this
this isn't
too
off track,
weird?
because that no, that's a perfect part to transition across to this idea of in the imperfect moments as well. So the difficult moments. My I, my personal journey, and then I'd love to hear you share from what you've seen of others. My personal journey was, I started out like, I used to be very angry, very frustrated, very ambitious, but in a very kind of cold-hearted, cruel way, because I didn't love life. Ultimately, I didn't love myself.
Mhm.
And I started meditation, and it was a nice practice. It helped me self-regulate a little bit better. It helped me respond a little bit more, react a little bit less. It helped me be a little bit more connected with others, and more connected and more in tune with myself. But it didn't take off as something which actually felt like a true mindfulness practice until I had 3 episodes of grief a few weeks apart from each other. My childhood puppy passed away at 12 years old. It's still my puppy in my eyes. Passed away, and I'm like, oh, this is a strange feeling. I've had a very blessed, like a very blessed, very gifted upbringing, and that was the first time I experienced any grief. It was grief, but it was a small amount. A friend of mine who I thought was a close friend did something which to or with his spouse, which I recognized was not at all in line with my values. I realized we'd grown apart, and I needed to grieve the loss of a close friendship.
Yeah.
And then my grandmother, who's one of my closest people when I was in my world as growing up, passed away as well, or was diagnosed as terminal. And those 3 things compounded onto each other. And if I didn't have the meditation experience, I don't fear, but I don't like the idea of where that would have been headed.
Right.
But as a result of the meditation practice, it got me to a point where I was able to then sit with those very uncomfortable feelings, and then be able to expand and feel this void as I'm walking around, and kind of like floating around, almost like in a little bit of a bubble, just feeling lighter and beautiful and connected. And I wasn't sad or grieving at her funeral, at my grandmother's funeral. I was in joy. I was actually in joy. I was in love, and I
Mhm.
had to tone it down because of other people around probably wouldn't be so receptive to that, let's say. But it was only as a result of the meditation practice, exactly what you teach, exactly what you talk about, exactly what you help people do, that allowed me to be able to experience that and release that and let that off my shoulders. And if that hadn't happened before I had my first daughter, who's now 3 years old,
Mm.
I I shiver at the thought of what type of father I would be or would have been over the last period of time. And so
Yes.
it really struck me when you shared that it's through the difficult and through the challenging times as
Yeah.
well, where
Yes.
it's possibly the most important or the most effective. Do you
Yes.
want to dive into that concept or that notion a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I have a very sort of simple way that I think about that. Actually, it's just that um, you know we're somehow only really alive when our hearts are open. It's all
Mm,
about having an open heart, and an open heart has to be a heart that has known heartbreak of some kind and grown through it, so that we can keep our hearts open. And actually, grief, I think, is one of the great teachers in any life, is to to grieve things. Um, well, I feel that's how we grow, actually. It seems to me it's the most important way that we grow,
That
because
would be that would be so scary to people who are listening to this who haven't experienced growth through the grief and through the pain and through the sadness and through the madness as well. They would be so scared listening to this, thinking, "What? I can only grow through more of it. I've spent my whole life running away from it. Don't tell me that. I don't want to hear it."
Yeah.
Do you want
Yeah.
to? Can
Well, I mean,
you
we've got,
drive
you
that
know,
message? Can you
yeah, I
drive that
mean,
message home for them?
well, let me see. I mean, we are mortal. Everybody we know and love is mortal. You know, as far as we know, we're all going to die. We're all going to lose. We're all going to lose everything, basically. So if we can forget that, and to bury ourselves in our activities and just not think about it because it's somewhere down the road, and it's not immediate. So why should I even think about it? Well, firstly, actually, I mean, the truth is, none of us knows when we might die. We might assume that it won't be till, we're in our 80s or 90s or something, but we don't know. We just don't know. And the older we get, the more we realize that nobody knows and things happen. And, I've had friends who died, far younger than anyone would have expected, unexpectedly, um, and this is where we're all going. And actually, to face that and accept it, rather than hiding in some sense from it, can be the single most valuable thing we do in prioritizing how we spend our time. And I believe what we'll find is that, if we do face it, actually we can have more equanimity and more peace once we really accept that this is the nature of things. But also, when we feel grief for any kind of loss or bereavement, we're somehow we're really joining the heart of the human race. It's something about our deepest humanity, our most beautiful aspects of our humanity are associated with facing loss and with grieving, and it opens up our hearts in a way that I don't know that anything else can. And to have our hearts open is the greatest blessing in life. It's like it changes the dimensionality of life if our hearts are open. We're living in a richer, deeper world with richer, deeper relationships, with more understanding, with more compassion, with more gratitude and more appreciation, and just in every way more richly, more fully. And as I was sort of saying earlier, even to the point where kind of what we do and how we do in life can matter less and less because we're having such a rich experience.
On that note, I know our time is up, and it's passed far too quickly. I wish it hadn't. Thank you for sharing your message and your journey with our listeners. I'm hoping that they're able to hear what you're saying about the power of loss and the power of grief, or the power of sitting with it and connecting with it and holding it closely and lovingly, as opposed to holding onto it tightly and focusing on it entirely, or just ignoring it and burying it down, but to become more aware. If there were a final message that you could share in 30 seconds or a minute or whatever it was with the listeners from what you've just shared, like from this conversation, and a note that you'd like to leave them with, what would it be?
Yeah. Well, really there is one, and it would be that it's going to sound really corny, but I believe we're kind of made to feel love, and when we do, somehow it's all a little different in a really beautiful way, and that our experience of love is just central. And I don't mean, I mean, yes, there's romantic love, there are different forms of love, but I mean, the sense of having love in our hearts. And it could be for really many different things. But as long as it's there, our life has purpose, true purpose.
That was a amazing conversation. There was so many insights, and a few which you shared with me right after the conversation, right after the recording as well. But let me just give you a quick summary of the key points which came from that. Firstly, I was asking Henry Shukman, who's an incredible meditation teacher, how do you define success? He doesn't like that word very much. He'd rather use well-being or happiness. He used to be tormented by this idea of success just because it was such a narrow focus. His 20s and 30s was filled with a decent amount of success. He was able to live reasonably well from writing, which as most people know, writing is not something which is easy to live off, and he loved doing it. And it was his pursuit of success that was a source of great unhappiness, because it was always external. But his deeper fulfillment came from when he was writing poetry and opening up something within him that he could speak as a poem. He felt highly successful, but he also felt a lot of fulfillment as a result of it, because he could find out who he was as a human being, could break away from the conditioned way of life. It was just a richer experience. And he had these amazing people who came along into his life, mentors and teachers, and a radical Catholic priest. And he had experiences on his own, whereas just 19 years old, and just a source of awakening. And we spoke a lot about what meditation actually is. The thing we do, usually sitting down, could be lying down, could be going for a walk, but we pay attention in particular ways to be able to cultivate a sense of mindfulness. So it's a kind of awareness that's broader than, as he described, broader than our object of focused attention. And the objects which we're talking about could be thoughts or feelings or emotions. It could be something physical that's in our way. It could be people around us. And these things can tend to distract us from who we truly are. And he shared that meditation is just a way to be able to recognize that we're alive and in this moment. We're reducing stress because we're usually unconscious of it, and then we're able to reduce it. And so when I asked about how to open up to this emotional trauma or pain that comes up from meditating, right? Because you're moving into these emotions, and you're moving into this fear. Well, sometimes you just got to get up, don't do it. If you're not supported, just go to the gym, go for a walk, do something else. But with support and guidance, it's a different picture. It's something that can truly transform you. You move into it, and you need that guidance when that's happening. That is one of the main reasons why we teach meditation at Purpose Advisory, why we teach how you're able to truly release. Well, not even release, but to allow it to release you. We teach meditation for this exact reason, because it can fill you with so much joy. It can bring out all of those negatives, all that fear, which is causing you to react to others rather than respond. And it's a beautiful tool that you're able to apply in your life. And so while releasing seems paradoxical, because you're putting in effort to let the effort, you're putting in effort to stop effort, it's actually not so much an intention to release. You're releasing the attachment or engagement with the thought stream. You just don't have to be caught in it. He described it like flowing, like you're being pulled down by a river. But you don't have to continue to be pulled down the river all the time. If the river's the thought, the emotions, and where your mind's going, you can choose to just crawl on the bank and let the river flow on by. You can find love. You can find peace and calm in your body. You can just let it be there. You can rest in a soft body. And then when that emotion comes up, you take care of it. You hold on to it lovingly. Not hold on to it saying, you can't go, don't go, stay here. And you're not holding on to it by saying, I'm just going to push it down and ignore that it's ever there in the first place. You don't hold on to it going, hey, this is a part of me. This is who I am. You can simply rest in it, and you can hold on to it. And you'll find that anxiety or that fear or that grief or that anger turns into and transforms into something quite beautiful. We can ultimately regulate our nervous systems and rewire our nervous systems to know what it means to be alive. He referred to changing the inner climate of his neurology, because that's what meditation has allowed him to do, to focus on grief. And then we dived into this idea of how to be a better parent, how to be a better spouse. And he shared that, yes, alongside therapy and a whole bunch of different things he's done, meditation and mindfulness has hugely improved this, a key part of it. And he sees his path in life as healing and deep awakening. He's more responsive, is less reactive, is much more able to just have a measured response because he grew up distrustful of others, scared of others, traumatized by others. And he shared an open heart is a loving heart. We can try to ignore that, but accepting it, facing it, learning to love it can be, as he said, the single most valuable thing we do when spending our time. And he said that he shared that can create more equanimity and peace inside ourselves. I believe he finished on, but also we somehow join the heart of the human race, one of love, one of joy, one of kindness, one of caring, one of compassion. And he shared that it's the painful experiences, those ones which we don't want to let go of, the ones which are just, which would rather just distract ourselves with Netflix or alcohol or smoking or whatever else you want to distract yourself with. He shared that it's those moments of being able to truly connect with that is how we can experience more love and more joy and more bliss in our lives, including how we can have less of the physical and the physical manifestations of the stress and the pain which comes up for us. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. We only just dipped our toe in the water. It feels like we just got the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more that Henry can share. So check out his work. Henry Shukman's incredible. But hopefully this conversation has been one that's able to inspire you to try out a little bit more meditation. Try out that 10, 15, 30 minutes a day as a practice to just stop and just find some stillness. Thanks for listening.